The crystal chandelier cast warm light across the mahogany-paneled dining room of Le Bernardin, Chicago's most exclusive restaurant. Detective James Washington adjusted his tie as he followed the maitre d' to his reserved table, the one he'd saved for months to afford for his anniversary dinner with his wife. "This table is taken," came a sharp voice behind him. James turned to see a woman in her 30s, blonde hair swept into an elaborate updo, dripping in diamonds that probably cost more than his annual salary. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed accusingly at his chair. "I'm sorry, but this is my reservation," James replied politely, pulling out his confirmation email on his phone. Table 12, 8 o'clock. The woman whose name tag read Madison Rothschild, owner, laughed coldly. "You clearly don't understand how this works. This restaurant caters to a certain clientele. People who can actually afford to be here." Her eyes swept over his modest suit with undisguised disdain. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the diner down the street." James felt heat rise in his cheeks but maintained his composure. "Ma'am, I have a confirmed reservation. I've already paid the deposit." "Deposits can be refunded," Madison snapped. She turned to the nervous maitre d'. "Pierre, please escort this gentleman to the exit and refund whatever small amount he paid." The restaurant had gone quiet, other diners turning to watch the spectacle. James noticed several phones discreetly recording the exchange. He remained calm, the way his police training had taught him. "I'm not leaving," James said firmly. "I have every right to dine here." Madison's face flushed red. "How dare you argue with me? Do you know who I am? My family owns half the restaurants in this city." Without warning, her hand flew across his face, the sharp crack of the slap echoing through the dining room. James barely moved. He touched his cheek, then slowly reached into his jacket pocket. The badge emerged, gold glinting in the chandelier light. "Chicago Police Department, Detective James Washington," he said clearly. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for assault." The color drained from Madison's face as if someone had pulled a plug. The dining room erupted in whispers and the soft clicking of phone cameras. Earlier that evening, James had been looking forward to this night for weeks. His wife Sarah was working late at the hospital. She was a nurse in the ICU, so he'd planned to celebrate their 10th anniversary alone first, then surprise her with leftovers when she got home. It wasn't glamorous, but it was what they could manage with their schedules. He'd noticed Madison Rothschild the moment she'd swept into the restaurant 2 hours earlier, her entourage of friends trailing behind her like satellites. She'd been loud, demanding, sending back perfectly good wine because it wasn't expensive enough and berating waitstaff for imaginary slights. James had been undercover for 3 months investigating a money laundering operation that involved several high-end restaurants. Madison's establishment had been on his watch list, though tonight was supposed to be personal time. He'd seen enough entitled behavior in his 15 years as a detective, but Madison's display was exceptional even by those standards. When the maitre d' had led him to his table, James had simply wanted a quiet meal. He hadn't expected to become the target of Madison's next outburst. "This is ridiculous," Madison shrieked as James called for backup. "Do you know who my father is? Harrison Rothschild owns the Rothschild Restaurant Group. He has the mayor on speed dial." The other diners watched in fascination as police officers arrived. Madison's friends had mysteriously vanished, leaving her to face the consequences alone. James read her rights while she continued to threaten lawsuits and political retaliation. "You'll never work in this city again," she spat as the handcuffs clicked shut. "My father will destroy you." James remained professional, documenting every threat for his report. As they led Madison away, he heard an elderly gentleman at a nearby table tell his wife, "Finally, someone who won't be intimidated by these people." The next morning, James found himself in internal affairs, facing Deputy Chief Patricia Martinez. The walls were lined with commendations and photos of Martinez with various political figures, including several that featured Harrison Rothschild prominently. "Detective Washington," Martinez began, her tone carefully neutral. "We need to discuss last night's incident." James had expected this. He'd written his report carefully, including every detail and the names of witnesses. "What about it, Chief?" Mr. Rothschild called the commissioner personally. "He's concerned about how the situation was handled." Martinez shuffled papers on her desk. "There might have been other ways to de-escalate." "She assaulted an officer," James replied evenly. "Multiple witnesses, video evidence." "Yes, well." Martinez paused. "Harrison Rothschild is a significant contributor to the Police Benevolent Fund. His family has supported this department for decades." She leaned forward. "I'm placing you on administrative leave pending a full investigation." James felt the familiar sting of institutional betrayal. He'd seen good officers buried before when they crossed the wrong people. "Chief, with respect, the evidence is clear." "The evidence will be reviewed thoroughly," Martinez assured him. In the meantime, badge and gun. James drove home through Chicago's South Side, passing the neighborhood where he'd grown up. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from reporters who'd somehow gotten his number. The video from the restaurant had gone viral overnight, spawning hashtags and heated debates on social media. His wife Sarah was waiting in their small kitchen, still in her scrubs from the night shift. She wrapped him in a hug that smelled like hospital disinfectant and comfort. "I saw the news," she said softly. "How are you holding up?" "They suspended me," James admitted, sinking into a chair at their scratched wooden table. Rothschild made some calls. Sarah's jaw tightened. She'd grown up poor too, had worked her way through nursing school while cleaning offices at night. She understood what they were up against. "We'll fight this," she said firmly. "I've already called my cousin Marcus. He's that civil rights lawyer in New York, remember? He's flying out tomorrow." Marcus Chen had built his reputation taking on powerful families who thought money could buy immunity. When he walked into the small coffee shop where they'd agreed to meet, James recognized the intensity that Sarah had described. Marcus moved like a man who'd seen battles and won them. "I've been following your case," Marcus said without preamble. "Madison Rothschild has a history. 3 complaints filed against her restaurants for discriminatory practices. 2 settled quietly out of court." He spread documents across the table. "There's more. The Rothschild Group has been under federal investigation for labor violations. Your arrest of Madison might have disrupted some carefully laid plans." James studied the papers. "So this isn't just about embarrassing her in public?" "Not even close. They're scared you stumbled onto something bigger." Marcus leaned forward. "I want to represent you. Pro bono. But I need to know, are you prepared for what's coming? They'll try to destroy your reputation, your career, everything." James thought of the elderly gentleman in the restaurant, of all the times he'd watched bullies win because good people stayed quiet. "Let's do it." The Rothschild counterattack began within hours. Suddenly, James Washington had a history of aggressive behavior. Anonymous sources claimed he'd been unstable since his partner's death in a shooting 2 years prior. Social media filled with carefully crafted narratives about police brutality and excessive force. Madison appeared on Chicago Morning, looking fragile and wounded. "I was terrified," she told the sympathetic host. "This man was clearly unstable. I barely touched him, and he completely overreacted." James watched from his living room, Sarah's hand tight in his. The edited footage made his badge reveal look theatrical, almost menacing. They'd cut out Madison's racial comments and initial aggression entirely. "Classic playbook," Marcus explained over the phone. "Flood the zone with alternative facts. Make people doubt what they saw." But the Rothschilds had miscalculated. The original video was too clear, too comprehensive. Marcus had located the businessmen who'd filmed the entire incident, and his footage told a different story entirely. Thomas Kim had been dining alone at table 15, celebrating a promotion at his consulting firm. He'd captured everything on his phone, including Madison's initial confrontation and her racist assumptions about James's ability to afford the restaurant. "I was going to delete it," Thomas admitted when Marcus tracked him down. "But then I saw the news coverage. They're lying about what happened." The complete video showed Madison's entitled behavior from the beginning, her unprovoked attack, and James's professional restraint throughout. More importantly, it captured her explicit threats about using her family's influence to escape consequences. Marcus prepared to release the footage strategically, but first he needed to protect Thomas from retaliation. The Rothschilds' private investigators were already sniffing around, trying to discredit potential witnesses. The federal investigation into Rothschild Restaurant Group had been quietly building for months. Agent Lisa Park had been tracking financial irregularities across their establishment chain: inflated invoices, suspicious cash transactions, employees paid below minimum wage while records showed full salaries. Madison's arrest had created an unexpected opening. Her public meltdown had drawn media attention to the family business just as investigators were preparing to move. Agent Park reached out to Marcus Chen with an unusual proposition. "We can't coordinate directly," she explained in a secure phone call. "But if certain information became public through civil litigation, it might help both our cases." Marcus understood. James's lawsuit could force document discovery that would support the federal investigation, while the criminal probe would validate the civil rights claims. It was a careful dance, but potentially devastating for the Rothschilds. Harrison Rothschild had built his empire through ruthless calculation and strategic intimidation. At 72, he wasn't about to let a police detective destroy what he'd spent decades creating. In his penthouse office overlooking Lake Michigan, he assembled his war council. "Status report," he demanded, not looking up from the financial projections his accountants had prepared. His chief counsel, Amanda Sterling, shifted uncomfortably. "The public relations firm is making progress on the narrative. but the original video is problematic. Detective Washington comes across as professional, restrained. And my daughter? Madison is following the script, but she's volatile. If she breaks character during deposition, Harrison's ice blue eyes finally lifted. She won't. Madison understands what's at stake. His tone carried the weight of decades wielding power over others. What about the detectives department? Deputy Chief Martinez is cooperative, but Commissioner Reynolds is asking questions. The federal investigation is also complicating things. Harrison stood, gazing out at the city he'd helped shape through strategic donations and carefully cultivated relationships. Then we accelerate the timeline. I want Washington discredited completely before this goes to trial. The assault on James's reputation intensified over the following weeks. Anonymous complaints appeared in his personnel file dating back years. Former arrestees claimed he'd used excessive force. A planted story suggested he'd been drinking before the restaurant incident. James found himself questioning everything, the weight of institutional betrayal heavier than he'd expected. But Sarah remained steady, and Marcus worked tirelessly to counter each manufactured scandal. They're desperate, Marcus observed during a strategy session in his temporary Chicago office. When powerful people start making mistakes, it means they're scared. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former Rothschild Group employee named Jennifer Martinez reached out through encrypted channels. She'd been the bookkeeper for 3 restaurants before being fired for asking questions about discrepancies in payroll records. I kept copies, Jennifer explained during a clandestine meeting in Grant Park. Harrison Rothschild has been stealing from his employees for years. Wage theft, falsified records, tax evasion. I was going to report it to the Labor Department, but they fired me first. Her documents were damning. Systematic theft disguised as administrative fees. Employees forced to work off the clock. Immigration status used as leverage to prevent complaints. The Rothschild empire was built on exploitation. Marcus realized they had evolved beyond a simple assault case. This was about institutional corruption and the abuse of power on multiple levels. The civil rights hearing was held in federal district court, with Judge Carol Rodriguez presiding. James had worked cases in her courtroom before and respected her reputation for fairness and intolerance for courtroom theatrics. Madison Rothschild entered wearing a conservative navy suit, her lawyers flanking her like protective shields. Harrison Rothschild sat in the gallery, his presence meant to intimidate anyone considering testimony against his family. Marcus began by playing Thomas Kim's complete video footage. The courtroom fell silent as Madison's racist assumptions and unprovoked assault played out in high definition. Her transformation from entitled socialite to arrested defendant was stark and undeniable. The evidence speaks clearly, Marcus told the panel. This was not a misunderstanding or miscommunication. Ms. Rothschild assaulted Detective Washington because she believed her family's wealth put her above the law. The Rothschild lawyers tried to introduce character assassination material, but Judge Rodriguez shut them down swiftly. This hearing will focus on the facts of the incident in question, not manufactured controversies. Jennifer Martinez's testimony about workplace conditions at Rothschild restaurants provided crucial context about the family's pattern of believing rules didn't apply to them. Federal Agent Park appeared to discuss the ongoing criminal investigation, her presence alone sending a clear message. By the afternoon recess, Harrison Rothschild's confident demeanor had cracked. His whispered conversations with lawyers grew increasingly heated as the scope of their legal exposure became clear. The verdict came swiftly. Madison Rothschild was found liable for assault and civil rights violations. The monetary damages were substantial, but more importantly, the judge issued an injunction requiring sensitivity training for all Rothschild Group employees and independent monitoring of their business practices. Money cannot insulate anyone from the consequences of criminal behavior, Judge Rodriguez stated clearly. This court will not tolerate discrimination based on race, class, or perceived social status. Outside the courthouse, James faced a crowd of reporters and supporters. Signs reading "Justice for Detective Washington" and "No one is above the law" filled the plaza. He'd become a symbol of something larger than himself. This was never about me personally, James told the gathered crowd. It was about whether we'll accept a system where wealth determines justice. Today, we proved that system can be challenged. Harrison Rothschild's restaurant empire began crumbling within weeks. Federal charges for tax evasion and labor violations followed. Madison faced criminal prosecution for assault. The carefully constructed facade of respectability collapsed under scrutiny. 6 months later, James Washington sat in the same dining room at Le Bernardin, now under new ownership after the Rothschild Group's bankruptcy. The new management had invited him for a complimentary anniversary dinner, the one he'd never gotten to finish. Sarah sat across from him, finally able to celebrate their anniversary properly. The restaurant buzzed with normal conversation, free from the toxic atmosphere that had once pervaded it. Any regrets? Sarah asked, raising her wine glass. James considered the question. He'd been reinstated with full honors after Internal Affairs concluded their investigation. Deputy Chief Martinez had been quietly reassigned. Commissioner Reynolds had personally apologized for the department's initial response. Only that it took so long, James replied. How many people suffered in silence before someone with a badge stood up? The former Rothschild restaurants were being converted to worker-owned cooperatives, with Jennifer Martinez leading the transition. Madison was serving 18 months in minimum security prison, her socialite friends having abandoned her completely. Harrison Rothschild faced federal charges that would likely end with significant prison time. As they walked home through the Chicago streets, James reflected on the lesson that had emerged from that confrontational evening. Justice wasn't a luxury that only the wealthy could afford. It was a right that had to be defended by ordinary people willing to stand up to extraordinary power. The badge in his pocket felt heavier now, weighted with responsibility and purpose. Tomorrow he would return to work, investigating crimes and protecting citizens. But he would never again underestimate the power of refusing to back down when confronted by those who believed their privilege made them untouchable. In the distance, the city's skyline gleamed with promise and possibility, a reminder that systems could change when good people chose courage over comfort.